My name is Bella Griffin. I'm 34, and for almost a decade, I've lived in a marriage that felt less like a partnership and more like a minefield. Every disagreement, every minor decision came with the unspoken threat of Stephen's ex-girlfriend, Veronica, a name that seemed to hover over our home like a specter. Stephen had this way of casually dropping her name into conversations, not as a memory of the past, but as a weapon. You know what Veronica would say about this, or I wouldn't want her to hear about this. It was subtle at first, a comment about my spending, a remark on the way I handled social situations. But over the years, it built into a psychological fortress around me, one I couldn't escape. I tried to reason, to push back, but Stephen had perfected the art of intimidation. Veronica, the brilliant divorce attorney, existed in his stories as an omnipotent figure who could destroy me if I stepped out of line. I still remember the first time he mentioned her in anger. We were at dinner, my favorite, simple pasta, candlelight, and he snapped when I questioned a purchase he made for the house. "You're making it seem like I'm reckless. Veronica would agree with me," he said, eyes hard. I laughed nervously. A joke, I thought, but it wasn't. It never was. Over time, her name became a constant background hum in my life. Bills I questioned, friends I called to vent, even small debates over dinner. Everything came with a subtle warning. "Don't forget, Veronica says this is serious. You don't want her involved." At first I believed it. I had to, or the fear would have consumed me entirely. I've spent countless nights lying awake, thinking about the what-ifs. What if Stephen's stories were true? What if this Veronica, glamorous, sharp, and untouchable, really was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to make one wrong move? That thought alone was exhausting. It made me compliant, docile, careful with every word, every gesture. But the longer I lived under this shadow, the more cracks I noticed. The inconsistencies in Stephen's stories began to jar against each other. A text he said he had received from Veronica. It never existed. An email he claimed she sent. The headers didn't match. A voicemail I was never allowed to hear. Conveniently deleted. Small details, almost imperceptible, but they made me uneasy. The fear that had paralyzed me for years started to shift into something else: curiosity. I began observing Stephen differently, paying attention to the rhythm of his lies, the patterns of his manipulation. Each mention of Veronica became an opportunity to scrutinize him. I remembered the countless times I had been threatened with her involvement: loans, spending, arguments over my family. And yet, despite the fear, there were moments where Stephen faltered, slips in his carefully constructed narrative that hinted at fabrication. It wasn't easy. I questioned myself constantly. Am I imagining this? Am I overreacting? Stephen was charming, persuasive, and deeply convincing. His version of reality had been my world for years. But in the quiet moments when the house was still, I could feel the doubt blooming like a seed. The thought that maybe, just maybe, I had been manipulated, that the omnipresent threat of Veronica was a lie, terrified me as much as it excited me. I started small, asking questions subtly, testing the boundaries, seeing if Stephen would crack. "Did Veronica really say that?" I'd ask casually over breakfast. Or, "Are you sure that's what she meant?" His responses were carefully measured, always a little too smooth, a little too rehearsed. And each time my confidence grew, bit by bit, like light piercing through a fog. The tipping point came one evening while I was organizing the mail. A letter addressed to Stephen caught my eye. It wasn't from Veronica, but from a law firm I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened. I opened it cautiously, expecting perhaps a routine billing notice. What I found instead was a simple, formal letter that made my blood run cold. It was addressed to Stephen, and in it, the law firm confirmed they had never sent Veronica any instructions regarding his personal matters. No consultation, no guidance, no threats. Nothing. Something inside me shifted then. The terror, the anxiety, the constant fear, they had all been built on lies. Stephen had been orchestrating this for years, constructing Veronica as a phantom to keep me in check. The woman who haunted my marriage, who seemed untouchable and omniscient, was only ever real in Stephen's mind, and in the clever deceptions he sent my way. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hand. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock, and I finally allowed myself to feel something I hadn't in years: anger. Pure, cold anger. Not at Veronica, she wasn't the villain here, but at Stephen, who had spent nearly a decade manipulating, threatening, and gaslighting me. Every missed opportunity, every stolen dollar, every late-night panic attack, it all traced back to him. But anger alone wasn't enough. I knew I needed proof, confirmation beyond a single letter. I needed to see Veronica for myself, to hear her side of the story, to confront the woman who, for all these years, had been an imagined tormentor hovering over my life. And in that moment, as I folded the letter and set it aside, I made a decision. I would meet the real Veronica, no matter the risk. I remember telling myself that day, I will uncover the truth. I will see her with my own eyes. And when I do, everything will change. The thought made me both terrified and alive. For the first time in years, I felt in control. My fear had been a lie, but my courage was real. And whatever I found, whatever came next, I would face it head on. As I prepared to reach out, my hands shook, not from fear, but anticipation. I thought of Stephen and the countless times he had leaned on his phantom ally to control me. I pictured him now, perhaps smug in his seat, never suspecting that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to crumble. I took a deep breath, sent an email to Veronica, and waited. The days that followed were heavy with tension. I replayed every interaction with Stephen in my mind, cataloged every threat, every mention of Veronica, every subtle manipulation. Each memory now burned with a new clarity. This wasn't my fault. I hadn't been weak. I had been deceived, and soon I would have my chance to set things right. I felt a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration. The storm I had feared for so long was coming, but for the first time, I wasn't running from it. I was walking into it. And when I did, I would finally discover the truth behind Stephen's lies, the phantom ex-girlfriend, and the life I had been living under the shadow of fear. The day I finally met Veronica felt like stepping into a storm I had long feared, yet secretly hoped for. I had imagined this encounter countless times, her, sharp and untouchable, glaring at me as if I had trespassed into her life. But reality, as it often does, was far stranger than my imagination. Her office was pristine, minimalist, with walls lined by law books and accolades that testified to her reputation. There was a calm authority about her, a presence that demanded attention without demanding it. She looked up from her desk as I entered and gave a small, polite smile. "Bella Griffin?" she asked, voice smooth, controlled. "Yes," I said, suddenly aware of how tightly my hands were gripping my bag. I need to understand something about my husband, Stephen." Veronica's brow arched, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Go on." I swallowed, trying to steady my racing thoughts. He's been using your name to threaten me for years. He said you could ruin me if I crossed him, that you were watching, protecting him, keeping me in line. I need to know if any of it is true." Veronica blinked, then a soft laugh escaped her lips. Not mocking, but incredulous. "Bella, you're serious?" I nodded, tension coiling in my chest. Every threat, every warning, all of it. I need to know. Her expression shifted from surprise to mild disbelief, then settled into something almost compassionate. "Bella, I've never had anything to do with Stephen in any capacity like that. Not legally, not personally. He's been fabricating this entire story." The words hit me like a cold wave. My stomach sank, and at the same time, a strange exhilaration coursed through me. I had feared her power for so long, only to discover it was all a mirage. The real storm had been Stephen all along. I sank into the chair across from her, feeling a tremor of both relief and residual fear. "You're telling me he's been lying?" I whispered. "Yes," she said simply, folding her hands. "He's been impersonating me. Texts, emails, even voicemails. He wanted you to fear me, to feel trapped, so you'd comply with whatever he wanted." It was hard to process. 10 years of subtle, sometimes overt intimidation, built on a lie. And yet, everything clicked. The inconsistencies I had noticed, the deleted messages, the vanished emails, all of it traced back to Stephen's careful orchestration. I remembered the nights I had spent awake, stomach knotting with dread over some imagined verdict, some phantom threat. All of it had been Stephen's doing. My fear, my anxiety, my compliance. it had been engineered. Veronica leaned back slightly, her expression thoughtful. He's clever, I'll give him that. But clever doesn't make it true. I can assure you, Bella, I've had no involvement in his schemes, and he certainly hasn't consulted me or even reached out beyond, the stories he's told you. I let out a shaky laugh, disbelief mixing with a surge of liberation. So, all the times he said you'd destroy me, all the threats, the warnings. My voice trailed off. All lies, Veronica confirmed. He wanted you scared. He wanted control. The weight of years lifted slightly from my shoulders, but only slightly. The betrayal was staggering. Stephen, the man I had married, who claimed to love me, who promised partnership and trust, had been manipulating me, using fear as a leash. I felt a mix of rage, grief, and an odd clarity. I don't even know where to start, I admitted. All the times I tried to reason with him, the money, the arguments, the constant tension, it was all engineered? Yes, Veronica said gently, but firmly. And you're not alone. I've had others, women who married him, or even just worked with him, come to me, confused, scared, thinking I was some kind of shadowy threat. He's talented at twisting reality, but you're stronger than you realize, and now you have the truth. A long silence filled the room. I thought of Stephen, the way he had wielded her name like a weapon. My anger simmered, cold and steady. The woman I had feared for so long had not been the enemy. Stephen had been the architect of the fear, and that realization sparked something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of control. I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly. So, what do we do now? Veronica's gaze was steady. We gather evidence, document every lie, every manipulation. If he's been this bold for years, he'll escalate once he knows the truth might come out. But with the right proof, you can protect yourself, and you won't have to face him alone. The words hit me like a lifeline. We would fight him together. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. We began to make plans, screenshots of his fabricated messages, copies of emails, records of financial manipulations, even notes I had kept of conversations that had terrified me. Each piece felt like a stepping stone toward reclaiming my life, toward exposing the years of deceit. And yet, a small voice in my head warned me, Stephen would notice. He always did. The challenge wasn't just uncovering the truth, it was surviving the fallout, facing the man who had built a decade-long empire of lies around me. I left Veronica's office that day with a strange mix of emotions, relief, disbelief, and a fiery determination. For the first time in years, I felt alive, awake, and dangerous in the best sense. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was planning, I was reclaiming, and Stephen, he would soon discover that the threat he had imagined, the phantom ex-girlfriend he wielded like a weapon, was now standing beside me in reality, and I was no longer afraid. On my drive home, the city blurred past, headlights like streaks of light slicing through my thoughts. I rehearsed conversations, imagined confrontations, prepared myself for the inevitable storm, and in the quiet of my mind, a single thought repeated over and over, years of manipulation end now. The truth will come out, and I will not be afraid. By the time I arrived at our house, I felt a strange sense of calm. Stephen, oblivious to the alliance forming behind his back, greeted me with his usual ease. But I noticed his confidence had cracks, tiny but significant, the way he straightened his tie a fraction too quickly, or avoided my gaze when I mentioned Veronica in passing. I smiled faintly, a subtle, knowing smile. For the first time in years, I felt the power of foresight, the thrill of being one step ahead, and I knew, without a doubt, that the coming days would change everything. I was no longer a prisoner of his stories. I was armed with truth, and for the first time, I felt like myself again. The alliance between Veronica and me felt surreal at first. After years of fearing her phantom presence, I was now working side by side with the real woman. She was meticulous, methodical, and utterly relentless, a mirror to Stephen's own cunning, but on our side. Our first step was to reconstruct the last decade of my life under Stephen's manipulation. Every text he claimed to be from Veronica, every email, every voicemail, if it existed, needed verification. If it didn't, we had to prove that he had manufactured it. I dug through old devices, screenshots, and deleted message backups. Each discovery felt like uncovering a buried body in my emotional backyard. You have to understand, Veronica said as we sat across from each other in her office, coffee cooling between us. Men like Stephen don't just lie, they create entire alternate realities. He's been rehearsing this for years, probably never thinking he'd be caught. I nodded, my hands trembling as I scrolled through a series of messages Stephen had insisted were from her. Each one was fabricated, cleverly constructed to manipulate me. Some were casual enough to make me doubt myself. Others were blatant threats cloaked in concern. I remembered the nights I lay awake, heart hammering, certain that Veronica was poised to intervene in my life at any moment. And now I saw clearly that it had all been Stephen. You'll need to document everything, Veronica continued. Dates, times, receipts, messages, financial records, even minor ones. Any evidence of threats or of him invoking me as a weapon, it all counts. We divided the work. I would compile my personal records, messages, journal entries, bank statements, credit card bills. Veronica would cross-reference with legal and professional records to ensure nothing was missing. Every day, I uncovered small betrayals that had seemed insignificant at the time, unexplained withdrawals, messages that had disappeared, subtle gaslighting tactics. Stephen had been orchestrating my anxiety, controlling my decisions, and isolating me under the guise of love. One evening, as I sat on the couch surrounded by papers and my laptop, I realized just how deep the manipulation ran. He hadn't just controlled my actions, he had shaped my perception of reality. I remembered thinking, countless times, that I must be overreacting, that I was imagining the threat, that I was weak. But now, seeing the proof, the web he had woven, I felt a surge of clarity and rage. This is worse than I thought, I said to Veronica during one late-night session. Every single fight, every disagreement, it's all him. He engineered it to make me doubt myself, to keep me compliant. Veronica nodded, her expression unreadable but focused. It's classic. He relied on fear as leverage, and the longer it went on, the more control he had. But that ends now. With this documentation, you can not only protect yourself, but expose him for the manipulative person he truly is. The process was grueling. Every new piece of evidence brought up a fresh wave of anger, but it also brought moments of empowerment, proof that I wasn't imagining things, that my instincts had been right all along. We started compiling a timeline. Stephen's patterns, the messages he had fabricated, the ways he had used Veronica's name to control me, and even the moments when he had lied about her involvement in our finances. As the weeks passed, Stephen began to notice subtle shifts in my behavior. I was calmer, more deliberate, and no longer fearful of his casual threats. I had started speaking differently, questioning inconsistencies, refusing to comply with demands framed as ultimatums. I could see him calculating, trying to gauge whether I was still vulnerable, and with each attempt he misjudged me more. One night I caught him glancing at his phone with a flicker of worry. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice measured, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. "Is everything okay?" I smiled faintly, a calm, controlled smile. "Everything's fine," I replied. But inside, I was thinking about the stacks of evidence waiting in Veronica's office, the careful records of every lie he had told, and the strategy we had planned. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just bluffing. His entire arsenal of threats was based on his own deception. And soon the bluff would be called. The most harrowing part was the emotional weight of uncovering these manipulations. Every text, every fabricated email, every false claim about Veronica reminded me of the fear I had carried like a second skin. I had trusted Stephen, I had loved him, and yet he had been orchestrating my anxiety, using a phantom figure to control me. Anger, grief, and relief swirled together inside me in a volatile storm. Veronica and I began rehearsing the confrontation. Not just what we would say, but how we would present the evidence, how to remain calm and factual while Stephen tried to twist the narrative. "He'll try to gaslight you in the moment," Veronica warned. "He's been doing it for years. Stay on the facts. Stay on the evidence. Don't let him pull you into the story he wants to tell." The tension mounted as the day of the planned exposure approached. I felt a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration. Dread for the confrontation itself, for seeing the man I loved and had trusted revealed as a manipulator. Exhilaration at the thought of reclaiming my life, of finally confronting the web of lies that had held me captive. Every night, I replayed scenarios in my head. I imagined Stephen's smugness cracking, his composure unraveling. I imagined the shock in his eyes when he realized the phantom Veronica, the figure he had wielded like a sword against me, was standing beside me in reality, confirming the truth of his lies. The day before the confrontation, I sat alone in our living room, the silence oppressive. I thought about the years of subtle threats, the long nights spent second-guessing myself, the fear that had become routine. And I realized something profound. I wasn't the same woman who had trembled under Stephen's words. I was sharper, wiser, more deliberate. The fear that had defined me for a decade no longer held sway. Veronica's voice echoed in my memory. Stay on the facts. Stay on the evidence. And I knew that no matter what happened, I would face him armed with the truth. The final pieces of evidence were ready. Screenshots of fabricated messages, copies of emails that had been doctored, records of financial manipulation, and a detailed timeline of every incident where Stephen had used Veronica's name to intimidate me. It was a dossier of betrayal, meticulously documented, ready to strip away the years of illusion he had created. I looked at it all and felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This was the weapon he had never anticipated. Truth, tangible and undeniable. The power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, I was not the frightened, compliant wife. I was a woman armed with clarity, evidence, and the support of someone he had never anticipated, Veronica. I knew the confrontation would be intense. I knew Stephen would try to twist the narrative, to assert control, to make me doubt myself one last time. But for the first time, I had no fear. The storm was coming, but I was ready, and when it hit, everything would change. The morning of the confrontation, the house felt impossibly heavy. Stephen moved through it with his usual air of quiet control, unaware that the tide had shifted. Every step he took, every casual glance he threw my way, felt like a prelude to the moment I had been preparing for months. I had Veronica on speakerphone, a subtle reassurance, her calm presence bridging the gap between the storm I feared and the storm I had meticulously prepared. Stay focused, she said softly. We have the facts, and we have the proof. He can't argue against reality. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. My hands gripped the papers on the kitchen table. Screenshots, emails, bank statements, meticulously organized, in a timeline that would leave no room for his deception. The air was thick with anticipation, but beneath it all, a steady pulse of empowerment kept me grounded. When I finally called him to sit down for a discussion, he raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on his lips. You look serious, he said. I am, I replied, voice steady. We need to talk about everything, about Veronica, about the lies, about the last 10 years. His smirk faltered slightly, though he quickly masked it. Veronica? You mean my ex? Yes, the real Veronica, I said, letting the words hang like a challenge. Not the one you've been pretending she was to control me. For a moment, his face was a mask of confusion, then defiance. I don't know what you mean. I set the first folder of evidence on the table, sliding it toward him. This is what I mean. Every message you sent, pretending to be her, every threat, every manipulation, you can't deny it now. Stephen's eyes flickered over the documents, a rapid shift from incredulity to a dangerous composure. You think this proves anything? He asked, voice low, calculated. I've never done anything illegal. I felt a rush of satisfaction. His old tactics, minimizing, gaslighting, were transparent now. You don't get it, do you? I said, voice rising slightly. This isn't just about legality. This is about truth. You've built an empire of fear using lies, and it ends today. Veronica's voice cut in through the speakerphone, calm and authoritative. Bella, show him the evidence chronologically. Let him see the pattern. Let him see the manipulation. I laid out the timeline piece by piece, watching his reaction closely. At first, he tried to interrupt, tried to deflect, but the sheer weight of the documentation was undeniable. Screenshots of fake texts, emails with doctored headers, financial records manipulated to appear threatening, all of it painted a portrait of deception he could no longer deny. This can't be real, he said finally, voice wavering. His eyes darted, searching for a loophole, a crack, anything to regain control. It's real, I said, feeling my chest expand with a mix of anger and vindication. Every word, every threat, every fear you planted, it was you, not Veronica. Not some omnipotent ex-girlfriend. You. For a moment, the house was silent, except for the sound of my own breathing. Stephen's composure crumbled, subtle but unmistakable. I saw the mask slip, the confident man who had controlled so many of my choices finally exposed. I didn't think you'd find out, he muttered, almost to himself. I did, I said, voice steady, and now I'm not afraid of you anymore. Veronica's guidance through the speakerphone was precise. Bella, you've documented everything. He can't manipulate this. Maintain calm. Stay factual. Let the truth speak for itself. We moved through the evidence systematically, and I watched Stephen's facade crack further with every piece. The more he tried to twist the story, the tighter the net of proof became around him. I could see the realization dawning. The phantom Veronica he had wielded like a weapon had become his undoing. By the end of the session, his anger had turned inward. No more smirks, no more threats, just a man cornered by his own web of lies. I felt an unexpected wave of pity, not for him, but for the years of fear he had imposed on me. When the confrontation ended, I felt light, almost buoyant. The air seemed to carry itself differently in the house. Stephen sat silently, defeated, while I stacked the papers neatly, each one a testament to survival, clarity, and justice. Later that evening, I sat with Veronica in her office, recounting the day's events. She smiled faintly, proud but understated. You did everything right, she said. You stayed calm, precise, and unyielding. He underestimated you at every turn. I couldn't have done it without you, I admitted, my voice soft. For years, I thought you were the enemy, and here you were helping me. She shrugged lightly, a trace of warmth in her expression. Sometimes the monster in the closet isn't who you think it is, and sometimes the person you feared most becomes your greatest ally. We laughed quietly, a brief release from months of tension, and I realized that a strange bond had formed between us. The woman I had once feared, the supposed architect of my anxiety, was now my partner in reclaiming my life. In the days that followed, Stephen retreated, no longer confident, no longer threatening. His control over me dissolved, leaving only the remnants of the fear he had nurtured for so long. I documented every remaining interaction, not out of obsession, but to ensure that the manipulation could not resurface. The house, once heavy with tension, now felt open, light. I could walk freely, speak without fear, and reclaim decisions that had been silently dictated by Stephen's lies. The power that had seemed unattainable, my agency, my clarity, my voice, was mine again. One evening, as I sat by the window, reflecting on the months of upheaval, I realized something profound. The fear, the manipulation, the betrayal, all of it had led me here, to a place of strength I had never known. I had confronted the lies, faced the man who had tried to control me, and emerged unbroken. Veronica called that night, as we often did now, not as a threat, not as an adversary, but as a friend. How's it feel? She asked. I smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. Liberating, I said. Terrifying, yes, but free, finally free. And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. Stephen's reign of fear had ended. The phantom ex-girlfriend that had haunted my life for a decade was gone, replaced by truth, clarity, and unexpected friendship. I looked at the stack of documents on the table, a symbol of survival, and whispered to myself, this is my life again. My choices, my decisions, my voice. And in that moment, I knew the past could no longer hold me hostage. I had faced the lies, exposed the deception, and reclaimed my power. The storm had passed. The house, once a prison, now felt like home. For the first time in years, I slept without fear.